Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s. I'm Matt Williamson, and today I'm going to continue with my Beatle album reviews. Now, the last proper musical album I did of the Beatles was in 1964, and I did Something New. And then I followed that up with two interview albums, Hear the Beatles Tell All and The Beatles Story. Instead of continuing forward in order with the US releases, I thought, I'm going to go back and have another look at the UK version of A Hard Day's Night, because it is a monster album and it deserves its own review. Now, I have done a review on the US version, which is this one here, and I'll leave the link to that at the end of this video. But one of the things that makes these unique, first of all, the US version was released 2 weeks before the UK version. Not sure why. So this came out, a week later the film came out, and then a week later after the film, the UK version came out. Not sure why those were staggered like that, but if you compare these two albums, they are like night and day. Just the look of them looks completely different. Here you have the UK version, very much more sophisticated, artistic looking with the film strips on the front cover. Even the font is a little bit more adult looking as opposed to the big cartoony font on the front and back of the US version. In this particular version, they use the font from the movie poster, and that was completely absent on the UK version. And the UK version also has full liner notes on the back. So very nicely done, very different. One extremely pop, very commercial, and one more serious. Now, one of the things that separates the two, other than, one is a proper album, one is a soundtrack, so that makes them different in and of themselves. But the UK version has 13 tracks, and the US version only has 8 Beatle tracks, with an additional 4 George Martin instrumentals. So back when I was younger, listening to this, I didn't particularly care for those instrumentals because it wasn't the Beatles. And over the years, I've gotten to appreciate those, and I can listen to them for what they are, which is period music. We don't really have to put up with that with the UK version, where we get 13 tracks, and the first side is all music from the film. Now, before we get into the songs, generally the sound of this album was an advancement from the first two albums. And the reason that is because this is comprised of all original material by Lennon and McCartney, the first and really only album of the Beatles to have that distinction. The other thing that made this so different and so mod sounding was the electric 12-string guitar employed by George Harrison. This new sound, they really utilized that instrument well. The opening track obviously is the greatest chord of all time, probably. Used it throughout the album, and it became the basis for a new genre of music, that being folk rock, headed by the Byrds in the United States. So that was a very big deal. The addition of having an album of all originals made it seem very modernistic, no anachronistic covers that they had been doing. So that just made this album that much more of the vanguard. So let's have a quick listen at side one.
Oh, please, don't hurt my pride like her. Just to dance with you is everything I need. Tell me why you cried, honey love.
Starting off with the title track, great song. Talk about a modernistic sound. That song certainly delivers, and I always have loved it because you have separate lead vocals from both Lennon and McCartney. And the song, everybody pretty much already knows by this time, coined by Ringo. That was one of his malapropisms. The Beatles wrote the song around, and Dick Lester, the director, had heard that and really wanted that to be the title of the film, which originally they were toying with the title of Beatlemania, which the Beatles were not excited about. That was not one of their terms, so they were very happy to use one of the titles from the songs. Now, the next song, I Should Have Known Better. Great happy-go-lucky song, one of the more positive songs of the Beatles catalog, and really takes it a step forward from the Beatlemania from 1963. If I Fell, one of Lennon's most tender ballads. I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. That was a spotlight for George. And I Love Her, another top-notch ballad by Paul McCartney, and some beautiful guitar playing by George. Very minimalistic track, and one of the best on the album. Tell Me Why, probably the least important track of side one, but still an energetic rocker from Lennon. And finally, we end with Can't Buy Me Love, which was a pre-release. It was released in March of 1964. Those 7 songs, including an additional song from the other side, constitutes the entire US album. There was only 8 tracks, but these songs are so good that it kicks ass anyway with only 8 tracks. So let's listen to side 2.
Anytime at all, anytime at all, if I could get my way, I get myself locked up today. Someday when I'm lonely, wishing you weren't so far away, I got a whole lot of things to tell her when I get home. But I came back again.
Side 2 is a little bit different, a lot more morose and much more sad, a little darker. And of the 6 songs on side 2, I think 3 are really top-notch songs. Paul's Things We Said Today, which at one point they wanted to be a single. The song You Can't Do That, which is just a great rock song, great riff, great backing vocals, good all around. Potentially could have been a single, I suppose. And then the surprise ballad that ends a very energetic album on a melancholy note is I'll Be Back. Now that song has always been a favorite of mine. That was covered on, I believe, Yes's first album as well. The other 3 songs, Anytime at All, I'll Cry Instead, and When I Get Home, those songs are Lennon songs, getting a little more formulaic, and we can see why those songs didn't make the film. It's probably because they're just not as strong as the other songs. One thing that's obvious to me on the UK version is that it shows that it is a John Lennon tour de force. I mean, this really solidified him as not just the visual leader of the group, but also on paper, where all the writing credits were, because he dominates this record. And I think that it really makes the Beatles feel strong because he's got these harder rockers. Now, what is one of the things that could make this album better? Well, they only had 13 tracks. The 14th track would have probably been a Ringo song had he not gotten tonsillitis. They left it at 13 tracks. I, for one, think to make this album a little bit better may have been even subtracting one other song, one of those Lennon songs on side 2. Maybe they weren't quite ready, could have used a little more work in the studio. It might have been best left for the next album. The other thing is I think it's too top-heavy with Lennon songs. I think we could use a couple Paul McCartney songs in there to balance the heavy John Lennon sound. So when this album came out, it was really the dawn of swinging London and things really kicking in that city. Had 2 #1 singles off this record in the UK, Can't Buy Me Love, and the title track, of course. This album went to #1 on the record retailer LPs chart and stayed there for many weeks. And it went to #1 all over the world. One of the Beatles' many masterpieces. So that's my review on the UK version of A Hard Day's Night. I'm going to follow this up with the next album, Beatles for Sale, so stay tuned for that here on Pop Goes the 60s.
Can't buy me love.